We have kind of a short time with you guys today, so I know we're not going to be able to do a whole in-depth walkthrough of the IEP system itself, but I want to get through some of the highlights, talk about things that have changed if you've used the system prior to this year and you're starting to use it this year. Talk about some of the startup issues that we've run into, and I want to make sure you're aware of those kind of things going forward. Always at this point of the school year, we have questions about access. How do I get teachers in? How do I get students in? How do I work with my caseloads and things like that? So I'm going to talk a little bit about those things. I do want you to feel free to ask your questions, though. So if you have any questions specifically, I can do that. Just be aware that if you do have a question and it comes down to a specific student, that may be something we can talk about at a break, or if you want to email me directly with that information, I'd be happy to do that. But won't be able to get into specific one student issues at this point, unless the whole group's encountering similar things. So. One of the biggest things that I'm asked to start the school year is how to get teachers access to the system from the get-go. Just keep in mind that all the access begins in Learning Connection. So if you're going to work in the system, you have to join your school community and your district or corporation communities as well. And the IEP access is governed at that corporation community level. So if you're looking for, let me see if I can show you this. I should be able to pretty quickly. But if you go into Learning Connection, even before you log into the system, at the bottom of the page, there's a help link. If you see that, right down here, and I can magnify that a little bit, maybe. There we go. There's help at the bottom. If you click on the help link, one of the first things that's on this help page is this IEP link, and that is what you need to find. So if you're starting a school year, or you've got a new staff member in and they've never been in Indiana IEP before, this is where you're going to start with access. They need to join your communities first, and then once they're in, somebody, possibly you, possibly someone else in your district, will have to follow these steps. So this is Indiana IEP access via Learning Connection. Because one thing that I want to make clear is Indiana IEP and Learning Connection are two separate systems. So Learning Connection is a Department of Education system that is our gateway to the IEP. All we get from the Learning Connection is your usernames and the access password, so it gets into the system. So this is really our access gateway into the system. The IEP system itself is a separate entity. So just keep those things. So when folks call me up and say, I'm having problems with Learning Connection, like, well, I can't really help you with Learning Connection. I can help you with the IEP system, though. I can help you a little bit, but I don't have the same level of access to the Learning Connection system that the DOE manages. So if you have questions, I might be able to help, but typically I'll be leading you off to somewhere else to get that information. However, if you get into the IEP system, that's where I can get involved probably. So that's your first step with the IEP system itself, getting access first. And once you have access, one of the things that the other phone call I get is, I've got access, I can get in, I see something here, but all I have are two options when I get into Learning Connect, or into Indiana IEP. Now I got myself doing it. When you're in the Indiana IEP, if you just see main menu and log out, no one has set your permissions yet. So some of you might have encountered that, or you might have had that complaint from folks before. So someone with a district administrator access can give you the right role in the system, and once that's given out, then you have access to your students. Okay. So once you've been given access, you'll see something that looks very similar to what you have here. This is a teacher of record access to the system, so it looks a little different if you're a district administrator or school administrator inside Indiana IEP. This page is going to display a little bit different information for you. As a teacher of record, this shows up just data around your caseload. So if you don't have a caseload set up yet, you won't see a thing. Once that's established, then you'll get into the details here. So most of this information revolves on these little widgets that you see, revolves around compliance. Okay, so you see this big circle up there, the big pie chart, that's your compliance pie chart. So this is really takes into account evaluation, IEP timelines, and tells you how you're doing. You can go, if you put your mouse over it, it gives you a little bit more information, and I can see if I can magnify that a little bit more for you so it's easier to see. But it doesn't give you a whole lot of detail. The one thing I want you to remember on these is these tables are only updated nightly. So if you've had a whole, maybe 3 or 4 case conferences in a day that's to fix up some of those red stop signs you had yesterday, it's not going to show up until the next morning. So don't panic if that happens to you. I just did 4 conferences. They're all final. We're ready to go. My little chart didn't move. It's all right. Wake up. If it doesn't happen the next morning, then let me know and we'll see what's going on. But the other widgets that you see on the front page, students with overdue dates, so this really breaks out for you the red part of that pie chart. So what exactly is overdue? So it could be evaluation timelines, could be IEP timelines. The system breaks out a couple things that we don't typically do. The IFSP is just how the system monitors, for our purposes anyway, early childhood intake. So if you're working with preschool students, if you see something red because of that, you've missed that 3rd birthday timeline or something along those lines. It does break out the eligibility though. So you can have a red stop sign by a student for either the IEP or the evaluation timeline. So if the evaluation is overdue, that'll give you a red stop sign just like an overdue IEP. So students by status, this just tells you what process the students are in. So if they're in the referral, you're in the referral process, or you're waiting for consent, or you're waiting for eligibility, those kind of things. So that may be a little bit useful to you, but not necessarily too much going on there. So we do have this next table just to break down a disability. So it gives you a quick reference how many students I have in this disability area. Again, administrators will see the same table. It will just show different groups of information. So this might see all of your students in a school rather than just your caseload. Now we're getting down to it a little bit as far as reports. If you've run any reports in the system, they will show up here. And I'm going to show you guys 3 reports. If you've trained with me before on the IEP system, you've seen them before. You may have forgotten since then, so I'm going to refresh your memory on them because they're pretty powerful for you. One of them will be this projected IEP meetings that you might see up there. The My Caseload is just your caseload as it's set up. If you're a school or district administrator, it'll say My Schools, and you'll be able to look at your school information rather than individual students. And then students percent time in special ed is it's flip-flop from where we think of as LRE. So this documents how much time a student spends in the special ed environment, whereas LRE is how much time the student spends in the general education environment. So this is a little skewed from that perspective. So that's something I would like to talk to PCG about, changing this widget so it shows us our percentages of LRE rather than this, which is maybe good information but doesn't match up with that piece. So just to finish up on this front page, messages just tells you what's going on if you've been invited to conferences and due dates and those kind of things. Meetings piece doesn't really show you a whole lot. It's not a really functional piece at this point. But I do want to make a connection with the documents and the system updates tab that you see down here. At the top of the page, you may have noticed that PCG has a nice neat little scroller that goes across the top of the page here, gives you some information. This will give you some details about upcoming changes. So if there's something coming as far as adjustment to the system or an addition or change, you'll get a notice here the system update has occurred or is coming. And at the bottom of the page under that system updates tab, you can see the details of what exactly changed. And now PCG has been doing a better job, and they're doing a real good job lately of doing webinars around changes to the system. So if you can attend those in person, that's great. If not, they'll have a link at the top of the page to that webinar, so it'll walk you through the changes to come. So they always do that a couple weeks before the change occurs. And as soon as we know, the Resource Center knows that a change is occurring in the system, we post those things out as well. So if you don't already, we have a Learning Connection community called IIEP. So make sure you join that community. We'll get information out to you that way. We also have a presence in social media. So we have Facebook page, Twitter, and Instagram, all that, amongst other things, will share updates and information around the IEP system. So those are a couple ways that you can keep track of us. So that's just the front page. I do want to spend a little time talking about a few reports that you guys might find of interest. You might not, but I'm going to do them anyway. So we'll try that. But I do want to encourage, if you're going through this, when I get into the IEP system itself, I'm just going to give you the high-level overview of some of those things and look at the changes that might have happened. If you have specific questions, just shout them out and we'll see what we can do about them. Okay, or what do I do with this page, or how does this work? Let me know and we'll see if we can figure out what you need to know. So the reports are pretty easy to get to at the top of the page. And if you want to, you guys can follow along with me and look at the same pieces, of course. Now, under reports, as a teacher of record, you have some set reports or scheduled reports that you can run. School and district administrators here have access to advanced reporting also, which I've already gotten some questions today about how we run some things like that. So look ahead. We do have advanced reporting workshops coming up this year. There's at least one more coming up, and we also have a second level of that advanced reporting training that we do over the course of the year as well. So I'm going to look under student data and compliance, and there's 3 reports that I want to point out that I think will be really useful to you going forward in your school year. Number 1 is a progress monitoring batch report. So if you're a teacher of record, this will allow you to generate all your progress reports at once. So if you didn't know this existed, you're spending hours of your time going through each goal and each student to get this done. So this is going to save you just a little bit of time if you go. Yeah, sorry? So it's a progress monitoring batch report wizard. It's under, if you go under reports and student data compliance, it's the first one on the list. So that's one of those things, if you haven't heard that before, you probably want to write it down. You're going to be very popular when you go back to your school and say, hey, I just saved you guys all hours of time over the course of a year. So let me just show you what this looks like. So just from the response I'm getting, a lot of you haven't seen this before. So when you look at it, it will first give you an opportunity to enter in a time period. So keep in mind that you typically are going to report out to this quarterly, or whatever your school report or timeline it happens to be. But keep in mind this IEP is going to span a different timeline than your school year. So you want to make sure you check a date that's going to show good data for parents to review. Because if you haven't put a data point in yet, it's not going to show on this report in that timeline, so be careful. So it has some options here that I'll explain briefly, but you have the first choice when it says select which IEP date to include in the report. This is, so if you've revised an IEP or it's an annual case review and the time frame you put in expands maybe several actual IEPs for that student, the first option would show all that data. So whether the goal is active or inactive, or the IEP is new or old, it's going to show it all. So you're going to get a lot more information on that report. That's especially useful if maybe you've just held an annual case review and you don't have any new data reported, but you need to report something. So that first option is going to give you all of it, whether it's from the current IEP or the last one. The second option is just going to give you data from the current active IEP. So if you haven't progress monitored the goals in that IEP yet, it's not going to show you anything on the report. So you want to think through that a little bit as you go through. And when you print out the reports themselves, it'll show you there's no data to report for this goal, and you want to say, I probably have some. I hope you have some progress monitoring data to report. And you want to make sure that gets done, or you can choose the other option, maybe show you some different pieces. You can also look and see, you might be able to adjust the dates on sometimes I've seen folks get a little frustrated when they pick the wrong date, and the date they chose didn't have any data points within it. So if you expand the date a little bit, you'll see a little bit more information. So as you go down the page here, you can select all the students you want to include in this report, so you can run this report for one, for all, or some of your students, depending on what your purpose is at the time. And then once I select it, you do have this option. And if you're going to be sharing this with parents, you probably want to make sure you put a break between each report. Otherwise, if you use double-sided reports, or you print out double-sided, the end of one report will have the beginning of the next one on the back. So you want to include that. You'll only make that mistake probably once, and then after that you'll remember, oh yeah, check the box. So once you generate it, and I didn't put any date ranges in there. I'll just go ahead and do that real quick. So I want to go back to the beginning of the school year-ish, and then to today, and then IEP, I'll get it all in there. So I did that just to show you what happens. So whenever you run a report in this system, it will take a little time to collect the information, and then you'll actually get an email when it's done. So if you don't have time to sit around and wait, you'll get an email, and then on the front page, you remember that widget that said My Reports? This will show up there. The question was, will the system error out if it's in envelope status or versus a green? It won't error out. What it will show you is the last IEP. It will not report. You can't, if the student still has an envelope by their name for the last IEP, you can't progress monitor on the goals in that IEP until it's final. Okay, so until it's accepted, I should say. So the final IEP is already final, but you need that green check in there if you want to progress monitor on those goals. If it's still got the envelope, then it's still in a passive state, I guess. The only thing you can report on is what's on the IEP previous to that. Because you haven't, if you're still in the envelope, you have actually not progress monitored those goals yet. You've only been progress monitoring on the goals on the currently active IEP. So in order for that IEP to become current and active, that envelope can't be there. It's got to be accepted. So a couple of the reports I wanted to catch you up on here. And just so you know, one of the nice things that PCG did for us on this system is all these reports have little pop-ups for when you mouse over them now. So when you get here and you're not sure what each of these things might do, put your mouse over it and it explains a little bit about what happens for that report. But I have two more that I want to show you, and I think they'll be pretty relevant for you. The second one is the accommodations report at the bottom of the page. Now, if you are an administrator, you can generate this as an Excel spreadsheet as well. So you have an Indiana accommodations report. So this will generate basically what this report does, as you can see in the description and you'll see here, is for my whole school, I want to group my students by, come on now, accommodation. So what this lets you do is everyone who gets extended time, preferential seating, who read aloud, those kind of things, it grouped those students together. So you'd be able to spit out a report and this is another one, the reason I show you these reports, this is going to save you a whole lot of time, especially if you're doing this for a whole school. Because you don't have to ask your teachers to report on it. You don't have to go through every single IEP to find where everyone's accommodations happen to be. So this just does testing accommodations, so you'll have a nice report that'll show you what you need to know. So as a teacher, you can run this as well, but it's only going to let you run it on your caseload. If you have a school rights or district rights, you have a little bigger scope. You can run it for your whole building at once. So instead of going one by one, all at once. So this is a little bit of a time saver. And believe it or not, every time, if you guys have been through IEP training with me before, this is at least the second time you've heard that. But that's one of those things that I talk about each time. So the last one I'll talk about here, then we'll go into the IEP process and talk about a few things, are the projected IEP meetings, this option here. And what it does for you is you can choose a group of students. If you want to see students with by age or grade or disability, you can make that selection. But what this does for you really is I can select today's date and maybe the end of the semester date and generate a report that shows me all the IEPs that are set to end in that time frame. So then I have one-page list of here's all my IEPs that I have to conference in the next 3 months. So, and you can do that. So that's kind of useful if you have a large caseload. It's hard to keep track through that big long list to see what IEPs are set to expire. It's also a powerful tool for administrators because then you can see, okay, here's all the IEPs in my building that are set. Are all these conferences set up and ready to go? So you can keep tabs on those kind of things. Any questions about reports or that piece? Or really, let's open it up this way. When we're looking at this front page, any questions about the school system, the reports really, the wizards? We can talk about those a little bit because that's caseload set up where you can go in and manipulate that. Yes, sir.
I have a question. The stuff that you just showed us with reports, I usually spend like 3-4 hours doing just that. That's awesome.
Oh, good. That's why those were put together. That's one reason you have to select those in the IEP, is to make reporting that much easier. So it should save you some time. Yeah. But the question was, if you've done all the right things for a staff member and they still don't show up in this system, what's going on? Well, if you followed all the steps correctly and you have it all done as we've went through it, there have been some issues recently with some. I'm going to try not to throw anybody under the bus here, so I'll see. There's been some issues with the user file and the student file occasionally as we started the school year, due to some of the development that's going on with the Information Technology Department at Department of Education. So that's a long way of saying, so we haven't got the user file every single day like we're used to, and we haven't got the student file every single day like we're supposed to. So that process should be resolved at this point. But that's what's been going on with that. So if you've done all your work and still you expect, if you do everything the way that we've described earlier, then you should expect the teacher to show up the next day or the day after. If they don't show up, then that's an issue with the user file not coming through. It's not your problem. It's something that I need to know about, so we can pass the word along to make sure that gets done. Because unfortunately, I don't always get the notification that file didn't go through until after I ask those questions, like, hey, why aren't these students showing up? Why aren't the users showing up? And then we find out. So I don't think it has anything to do with anything you're doing. But if you still don't see it, let me know, and I can just double check, and then we can pass it along to the right folks to get that access. Now, PCG, or Public Consulting Group, can do some things to help us manually set up user accounts. So if it's a need to, I need them to give them access today, then we can contact PCG and they can do that for us very quickly. All right, I'm using up my time fast here, so I want to make sure I get to everything I want to talk through. I'm going to go ahead and get into a student and talk to you a little bit about what's going on there, and then you guys can shoot questions at me as we go through that process too. So I'm going to go into students, and I wanted to point out one quick thing here. For those of you that, teachers of record, this might be kind of useful for you, but those of you that are managing a school or working with a couple of buildings, this advanced student search can be a really helpful tool. If you haven't found it before, this is a really nice addition to the system. It's been there from the get-go, but if you click on it, it shows you at the top the same kind of search tool we just saw, but as you scroll down the page, you can search for students. You can show your whole list that has stop signs if you want, or if you're really looking to have a bad day, I guess you could do that. But it can also give you a count if you're looking at your school. I want to know how many students have a specific learning disability as their primary disability, and there you go. Or I want to know if there are students that have a specific learning disability that are in the 52 category, which probably shouldn't happen. So, but I want to know if it is, so you can investigate the reasoning behind those kind of things. So this allows you to do look at some different things in this. It also breaks things out by services and then related services. So you have a lot of different options in this, some quick tools to get numbers, counts, names of students, all those things you might want to know to review processes that are going on in your school. Does that make sense? It's a good tool. So I'm going to go into view my caseload, though, and show you one thing and talk about another that's coming before we go on. So if you want to know more about the compliance indicators, because there's a variety of them as far as what letter goes in the body, if it's a triangle with a P in it, or a triangle with a T, or an E, or what have you, what does all that mean? I haven't memorized them either. So when you guys have questions about those, the first place I look, sometimes anyway, is at the top of that column. If you click the letter CP, it takes you to this page, and it gives you a breakdown of what all those compliance indicators mean. Okay, the key ingredients here are that red's bad, yellow's where I should start getting worried, green's good, right? So the ones that hop out that are a little different, though, are the T with the line, the black arrow through it. What you see, that's a transfer indicator. So just keep in mind that That's a very relatively involved process for transfers. So when a student comes into your district, you need to know who to talk to get that process started. Because right now it is a manual process. So someone has to request a transfer, process the transfer, and then accept it on your end again. So it's kind of three or four step process there. There's communication at the beginning. We have to ask the previous district for the information. They have to send it. We have to approve it to go in. So that's the process right now. Now, some really good news. I'm starting to feel like we're getting close on this one is the possibility of automating transfers in our state, so that once you reclaimed a student in real time and their STN shows up in your site, then the system will automatically populate that record. So that'd be ideal, but we'll see how that goes. Yes, ma'am.
Wouldn't you get a student with an IEP that transfers out of state?
So if you have an out-of-state transfer, they're not going to have the automation's not going to work, obviously, since we don't have any electronic connection there. If you do have an out-of-state transfer, I'm going to get into a student and I'll show you what to do there. Okay. So let me go ahead back to my student list, and we'll start off with that conversation. Now, before I get into that, though, the point I wanted to mention, I think a lot of early childhood folks have asked for this for a while, but coming soon, I think in the next week or two, you're going to see another field on this page just with the birth date. So I'll have the age of the student and the birth date right next to it. So that's, a lot of folks have asked for that. Some of you are like, okay, whatever. Others are like, finally, I've been waiting for this my whole life, and it's finally there. But however you feel about it, that's coming soon. So let me look at one of these students, and I'll try to show you the process for move-ins anyway. So this is going to look, I'm actually in a teacher of record account right now. So it's going to look a little different than you might see it, but basically what you have to do for move-in students is enter in some of the information, as there's not going to be anything in the system for that individual. So what Indiana IEP needs to work is an eligibility and an IEP date. So if we can enter those two things in, then we can move forward with a move-in from there. So we do have some direction. If you go to our website, actually, I had it up here. Actually, if you go to our website, we have a move-in process document there that'll walk you through what I'm going to talk about here. But where you want to go is in this eligibility piece. So at the top of the page, I clicked on eligibility, and you see this eligibility information screen. Now, like I mentioned, this is a teacher of record account I'm looking at, so I can't actually edit these things here. As a district administrator, though, I can. So if a student's from out of state, all these things will probably be blank. And all I have to do this, to work with this student, is enter in the eligibility date, the IEP date, and the current eligibility, or currently eligible, that's redundant, the first box. So you want to make sure you put your eligibilities in, and your eligibility date and IEP dates. Once you update the database, then your teachers can start processing that student's IEP. Now, one of the things that's going to be a little bit better for us coming soon, actually next summer, is those of you who work with younger students, the developmental delay label is going to go up to 8 years old, I believe, 8 or 9. So, which will match what's going on in other states around us. Right now in Indiana, that label drops off at 6 years old. So that's going to make that transfer, that move in, a little bit easier. That's a bit of a task if a student's been labeled as developmentally delayed somewhere else. And when they come into our state, they've aged out of it for our state. So now we have to figure out how that aligns. And it can be a little bit of a process there. So that as of next summer, I think July 1 even, then that's going to be a little bit easier. So did that answer your question for the move-ins there? Okay. And like I said, we do have resources on our website that talk directly about that as well. And you have these handy-dandy cards here that do have our website address at the bottom. So there's a whole section under a place called the Learning Center dedicated to Indiana IEP. So the whole thing's there. And if you haven't been to training with me before and would like to, there's obviously events in there you can attend. There's also a full video of the training days there as well. On the same page next to the training video for IEP has a whole bunch of videos for administrators there. So if you want to know how to do caseload, administer caseloads, set up users, do transfers, all that kind of stuff, it's in there for you to follow along. And most of those videos are maybe 10 minutes long, so they're not too long for you to take out of your day to figure it out. And if you can't, if after that you still are struggling, let me know and I'll help you out and see what we can do. So I'm not going to jump into necessarily every piece of this puzzle here because there's a lot of moving parts in the IEP, but I want to speak to a few questions that I get regularly and submit things that have changed or will be changing in the system so you're aware of what's going on. One of the things that seems a little silly, but I still see it. I had a question about it on the way up here this morning about legal guardian. So make sure here that you've checked off somebody as legal guardian under parent information, because if you don't, when you get to the IEP later on, the parent won't show up anywhere. So it gets a little frustrating. It's one of those things that happens once and you get it, but it happens every year. There's a whole rash of calls and emails and stuff with folks frustrated about that. So that's a big piece. So the other things that are going on this page, communications, you can track those under the communications tab if you want to do it there. Student history and documents are kind of related. In student history, you just have a list of all the events for the student's IEP, so you can check back and see the order of things as they've happened. Under the documents, you can see the documents that are associated with those events, plus anything that's uploaded into the system, so you can do all those things there. Okay. You guys have any questions about those in specific? Is student history or documents anything you'd like to see in detail around there? Going once? All right. If you have questions, we can always come back. Now I'm going to go ahead and do a quick overview of each one of the processes, then I'm going to dive into the IEP process specifically. So the 4 processes that we have in Indiana IEP begin with the pre-conference planning. This is your referral process. So those of you that are new to the system, new to your school, just make sure you know who's doing this. So if you have a parent that's requesting a referral or requesting testing, or if you've determined that you want to follow up with the testing on a student, who do I talk to get this started? Because it is important that we document that, because the referral decision is an important piece that as parents come to us, or we have to determine whether or not we want to pursue the evaluation of that student, and that's where that can be documented there. If we want to pursue that evaluation, this then generates that permission to test form with all the suspected areas of eligibility and the assessment domains that have to be addressed for that student to be eligible, or for us to find out whether or not they're eligible, I suppose, is a better way to put that. So input of this is a request for testing. Output is, are we going to follow the testing? Yes, then it's an evaluation request. No, then it's a notice that we're not going to follow that. Okay? The evaluation process is then, once we send out the evaluation request to parents, record their response to that. If it's no, then we stop. There's nothing else for us to do in that instance. If it's yes, then we process that evaluation. Then we line it up, who's evaluating the student, and we do all those tests, and the output of that evaluation process is the educational evaluation report. That can be developed in the system directly, or it can be uploaded, or any hybrid of those 2 processes could be done. So it's pretty flexible in that, in the next process under assessment data there. Now that's gone through a significant rebuild over last summer, and all that information is available as well. So there's a nice video that walks you through the details and some documents that can help you with that as well. So if you have questions about, hey, this assessment data page looks different than it did last year, we have some documentation that'll help you with that. So if you're struggling with that piece, trying to figure it out on your own, you don't have to. Just let us know, and I can at least send you the information, if not direct you to it specifically. So the IEP process is our next piece. Of course, once we have tested the student initially, we have to respond with an offering of FAPE, which is what is developed in the IEP. And if the parent rejects FAPE that we've offered and wants to homeschool their student or go to a private school, then that's probably not something typically a charter school is going to have to deal with, because that's an issue that'll be addressed by the corporate legal settlement more than likely. Okay, so we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on that one. So I want to jump into the IEP process, barring any questions you might have. Anything specific as far as the pre-conference planning and evaluation process that you want to dive into? Yeah, if you go into
I got that in there.
parent consent here, and if I say today's a reevaluation and save it, according to whatever reevaluation type I've already chosen, it tells you right there. Evaluation must be completed in conference by 11/23/2017. So now, and also when I go into the IEP process, when I start scheduling the meeting, it'll show the date on that page too, so you can see it right in front of you. That also brings up a good point here. If you come into the situation where the parent has requested and approved an evaluation, but then they want to come back, they will come back and decide to revoke that consent. You can document that here too, so that all that can be processed right in the system. So, going into the IEP process, one thing I like to mention on this is there's a reason for the order of these things as you look at them. So as you look through, starting at meeting purpose and going through each column, there's a reason they're in the order they are. And that really comes to us from Article 7, telling us how we need to address different pieces of the student's plan. So there's a reason that we talk about data before we talk about eligibility and placement and services later on. So it makes sense. We don't want to get into procedural problems well, let me try that again. We don't want to have procedural problems by talking about placement as the first thing. That comes after we talked about where the student is, what they're able to do, and what we have to offer for them. Then we talk about, okay, what's that placement look like for all those things to happen. So if you struggle with that for whatever reason, this can be a good start to an agenda, and that's something I'd suggest to anybody running a case conference that's especially new to the process, is that you talk amongst yourselves and have an agenda. So something you can laminate and stick in that room wherever you're holding the case conference, so we can share it with parents. Here's how we're going to go throughout this meeting, and you can share it with each other so it's always the same. Especially if you're an administrator trying to keep track of everyone's case conferences there. Like, let's just talk about what the order should look like and what I want you to say. Maybe not a script, but here's the things you need to talk about under each item. And the IEP system is a good starting point for that kind of idea anyway. So I'm going to go through these and hit the highlights. If you guys want me to go deeper again, I can get there. One thing I always get questions about for meeting purpose is this little number at the bottom of this page. If you choose annual, or if you choose revision, you get this box at the bottom that says reset, which freaks everybody out when they see it. Because first of all, I want to settle your minds a bit here. It doesn't delete. The only thing it really removes is the Schedule CCC meeting page information. So it's really the purpose of this is to help you prepare for your next case conference. So it clears out the Schedule CCC meeting page because you're going to have to generate a new notice. So you can put that information in new there. It's also going to do this, which is what really freaks people out, is it takes away your little green check marks. So the first response is, oh my gosh, the check marks are gone, so everything must be deleted, and that's not the case at all. All that's doing is making you go recreate those check marks again. So you have to revisit the page, hit save, continue. If nothing's changed, you get the green check mark back. All the information should still be there. And then it will make you, of course, update the timelines. So if the dates, the begin dates, end dates need to change, it'll make you do that anyway. But this at least sets you up for that. So the idea here, at least, is that before I go to a case conference, I have at least reviewed the IEP. Ideally, you've changed some things as well. I mean, we shouldn't have the same exact present levels from last year to this year, obviously, or the same goals, or necessarily the same exact services. Things change, kids change. So the IEP shouldn't be just rubber stamp from year to year, which you see every once in a while. But that's one of the things that's nice about, well, having an electronic IEP is things stay in there so you don't have to rewrite, you just edit. It's also one of the biggest detriments to it. You don't have to rewrite, you just edit. So things don't change very much if you're not careful. So that's where it takes a little accountability to make sure those things do change. So meeting purpose, not much else going on in that piece. The create CCC meeting, or the CCC team, is just where you select from your list of folks who have access to the student to make a shorter group, a smaller group for that meeting that's coming. The schedule meeting page itself, you can see here the evaluation date comes in red, just like we mentioned earlier. So it's a reminder we have to do this meeting before that time. So you enter in the appropriate dates there. This system is going to make sure you invite the right people based on the meeting purposes you have. So you have to enter in something for these folks. If anyone's going to miss for part or all, you can document that here. Just make sure that if someone's going to miss that's in this group anyway, that's in this group of invited individuals here, that prior written consent is part of that conversation. So if one of your teachers is going to miss all or part of the meeting, that discussion needs to happen before the meeting begins. Now, one thing I want to make clear, though, is that rule that I just mentioned only applies for everybody above this line. So if I invite more people besides what's on this list here, so add additional attendees from either the team or from anywhere else, they do not follow that rule. So if I have a general education teacher here, they have to be excused via prior written consent. If I add more gen ed teachers down here, they do not. So that's a little bit confusing, but I've seen folks get really rightly so uptight about that. But if you have folks beyond that core group that attend, they just follow whatever your protocol is for excusal, whatever that happens to be. And I guess my suggestion would be that you have a protocol for excusal so it happens the same way every time. I guess the last thing on this page to mention are the transition pieces, making sure your transition agency representative is invited at some point during the student's high school career. And the consent is a little different for them in that they have to have consent to attend, not consent to be excused. So it's a little bit different ball game from that perspective. So I'm going to have to pick up my pace here, it looks like. So existing data is pretty straightforward. No real new features on that page. Just enter in the fields as you see them. The eligibility information, I guess the only thing to really say about that is be careful. That's just one area you want to touch only at a case conference. You don't want to make someone eligible today, for example, if you're looking at an IEP. Special considerations and behavior concerns. Big piece on this one is what happens when there's actually not a whole lot going on. The only thing that changes on this page is if you have a student who's has a low vision or blind student, you'll see some Braille interactions here that are different. That'll have a few more options for you, but that's not going to happen to you very often. Just be aware that those things might appear on this page if that's one of the eligibility areas happens. Now, I know that you guys heard a lot about transition already, so this is your holding spot, your entry point for all your transition information. So the service, the goals, the assessments, summaries all go on this page here. State assessments, the big question on this one I get most of the time has to do with alternate assessments. A lot more extensive interaction for alternate assessments here, and making those criteria very clear for you as you're looking at that. Because if a student doesn't meet those criteria, and when the state reviews that, and if the state reviews a student's IEP or their test and they don't meet these criteria, and they'll be flagged as a non-participant then. That's not going to be a good thing for you. So you want to make sure your students are taking the right assessment. It's not going to be very many that really truly qualify for the alternate assessment. The goals, I'm going to talk a couple things here. One thing, we made it easier to add goals here, so you don't have to fill in half a page before you can complete the goal. Just add in the title and get going. when you look at the goals themselves, two things I want to point to here, maybe three that have changed. Don't forget about the copy goal button at the top. So if you didn't quite meet a goal but want to update it, you can click that copy goal button and you can edit the whole thing and build a new one. Two things that have really changed. The standards have moved up in the rankings as far as where they occur on the IEP goal writing process. So I want to make one thing perfectly clear as we're looking at this, that the standards you pick need to be from the grade that the student's enrolled in. So if you're an 8th grader, 8th grade standards. Or if you're writing an IEP in the spring, think about the grade they're going to be going into. So I want to make that really clear. That's the expectation anyway. You also have an option when you look at this for students that are being alternately assessed to choose from the content connectors. So there's a couple different groups of standards you can select from, but they're all in the system there. So, and keep in mind we also we'll have a testing change here before too long from iStep to iLearn. Those things will be, as the accommodations change, if the standards ever change, the system will adjust to meet that need hopefully before you need it. The only other thing on this page that's changed is the specially designed instruction piece. And this is just a place for you to talk about what you plan to do for the student. I don't know if Joni mentioned it earlier today, but this should get you started to think about the work you're going to do with the student in terms of the goal you're about to write. So if we're writing something around decoding or social skills or math skills or computation or whatever, or problem solving, what do we plan to do about that then? And the goal then becomes just how are we going to know when we're done? How are we going to measure the quality of that effort? So that's really something that can be helpful with you. And if you're interested in learning more about goal writing, you can travel up to Muncie with me tomorrow for a goal writing workshop, but we're going to be coming back here later, maybe even next week, I think, for goal writing. So if you want to see a whole day on that, we'll be here for that too. So, and we'll have some resources for you to share if you want those. So, I don't have a whole lot of time, but any questions about goals in general, the goal page that I can answer in fewer than 5 minutes? That slows it down a little bit, but. So if you're interested, if you have questions, feel free to ask them. If you want to shoot them my way later on, I'll do my best to give you the answer I can. The provisions page is not a whole lot for you there. Keep in mind that apply button at the top will make it a lot easier to complete. This page itself is really about questions and answers, so as you go through it, it should be pretty straightforward for you. Keep in mind all the services do tie into post-secondary goals if that's the age of your student, so it all should work together. And I think that's pretty easily. Now, one of the things that we've been talking about recently, I'm not sure how many of you this is going to affect, but adding a little bit to this emergency evacuation plan, which isn't going to be there for many students, but when you check it, just give us a box. I think we'll include a box that will ask you where you can find that plan. And we may also be able to add in a little piece about a health plan as well. So if a student has a health plan, where can we find the health plan so we can follow that for the student? Because at this point, there's no plans to include those things directly into the IEP, but we want to make sure if you check that they exist, that there's a directive as where you can find that information. The ill replacement piece, the only pieces there's two things I need to mention on this one is to make sure on the top, the students in that transition age group that would choose their diploma outcome for that student, and a summary for the conversations we had around their progress toward that diploma. Keep in mind that, at least according to the rules that we have to follow, the teacher of record is responsible for that contact to let parents know the progress they've made toward the diploma and what they're going to have to do to get there. Last thing on this page, I guess key ingredient on this one anyway, is potential harmful effects. Just make sure you document those clearly. This page is going to go through a subtle change here before too long, I think, where we'll see a little more information around the corporate legal settlement. So you guys will see the student's corporate legal settlement, the accountability school. So you'll see if a student's going to a charter school, you'll see the charter school appear there in name, and then you'll have a place to enter in the educating school. For some reason, that would be different. So I have those options. It'll look a little different, but it'll collect the same pieces of information. I want to make sure I talk about the Create IEP page. That's the very last piece in the process. As we move some things around on you here, nothing that's going to make a huge impact as far as its location, but we felt like it made more sense to have at the end of the case conference conversation. First, the discussion around the need for reevaluation happens toward the top of this page, so that makes a little more sense to have that conversation at the end of the case conference. After we've reviewed all the information, do we feel we need more? Then you can document that here. That's also going to move that conversation from the middle of the IEP report document to the end, so you're going to see those things match up a little bit better. We also move that continuation of the case conference meeting. Now, first thing to keep in mind is this is a completely optional field. You do not ever have to use these two fields for continuation of meeting. The only time you would want to use them is if you were unable to complete the case conference in the time you allotted. So if you're meeting that day and we have an hour's time or two or whatever it happens to be, and we can't get the work done, we can't get to a final document today, we can document, we met today, we plan to meet in 2 days to finish up, or we plan to meet next week to finish up. So that's going to document that you did what you're supposed to do, in that we met annually to discuss the student's IEP and consider a plan for the next year, and then we're going to meet again to finish the work. Does that make sense? So you don't have to use those fields ever. If you're done with your work that day and are ready to create a final IEP, you don't want to check anything off there or enter anything in there. So otherwise, it's pretty straightforward. The rest of the page hasn't changed much. You guys have any questions? Before we, Steve's standing over here on the eaves, so I think he's ready to pull me off the stage. Yeah.
Contact information for you.
My contact email is matthew.johnson@indstate.edu. I said it really fast, but if you go to our website, there's a contact us link on the lower left, and it has all of our emails and phone numbers there, and by our pictures, so you won't get us confused. Yeah, Matt Johnson is me. Matthew.Johnson, and I can show you on our website real quick. So this is our website. This is probably a good place to finish up anyway. The bottom left, you see our staff and contact right there. That's all of us. And I'll show up sooner or later. That's me right there. There we go. So that's all of our staff. So if you want to contact us directly from any means, honestly, the best way to get a hold of me typically is through email, just because I'm doing a lot of training, so it's hard to get to the phone all the time, but that'll get you in contact with all of us. I will show you one other thing too here, that under the Learning Center, like I mentioned earlier, if you look under Learning Center and IEP System, here's all those documents and videos that I mentioned. So you have the IEP Anytime on this side, which is the full day walkthrough of the IEP system. On the right-hand side, our videos specific to administrators. And they're actually little playlists, so you can click here. IEP at a glance, move-ins, transfers, all that stuff's there. And then below that, we have documents that support the same information. Okay. So with that, it's your time for lunch, I think. So I probably should let you go. I'll let Steve dismiss you.